Greetings and welcome to the Be the Ultimate Assistant podcast with Bonnie and Vicki. I'm Vicki Sokol-Evans.
And I'm Bonnie Low-Kramen.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hello again, Vicki.
Oh my gosh, this is part 2 of our interview with Dr. Laura Crawshaw.
And, for all of our listeners, I hope you listen to every single second of episode 1. And here we're going to get started with episode 2. It's so exciting to have one of the leading experts in the world with us to talk about workplace bullying, which is a problem affecting every country, every place we go.
So this episode, the part 1 is actually episode 4 of our podcast, and this is episode 5. So part 1, if you want to go listen to that one, go check out episode 4 of our podcast, and this is episode 5. So we hope that you're able to do that. Okay, well, I will go ahead and start the introduction. I'm going to bring Laura on. With over 30 years experience as a corporate officer, researcher, psychotherapist, and executive coach, Dr. Crawshaw, known as the Boss Whisperer, is on a mission to reduce workplace suffering caused by abrasive bosses. Exploding the myth that so-called bully bosses intentionally set out to harm employees, Crawshaw discovered the exact opposite. Lacking the ability to read others' emotions, the majority of abrasive bosses are blind to the wounds they inflict. She also challenges the commonly held belief that abrasive bosses can't change. And as we saw in the previous episode, we're cluing in that, many can change. So, Dr. Crawshaw, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yay. Well, I have our first question for you. I'm really curious as to if you've actually experienced the situation with an abrasive manager, and also what got you interested into this topic and this field to begin with.
Well, I was lucky enough in my early career, my first couple jobs, to have really great bosses. And so I ended up way back in 1980, this sounds like ancient history, in Anchorage,
Right
Alaska.
with you.
Right, in Anchorage, Alaska, working for what's known as an EAP, an Employee Assistance Program. So I had a degree in psychotherapy, and the EAP is designed to provide confidential counseling for employees, primarily on family problems, so that if they're experiencing distress in their families, they can come to the confidential counseling, which is paid for by their employer, to address those issues and hopefully get them back to productivity in the workplace. To my surprise, I found that many people were coming in not about personal issues, but about workplace issues. And I'll never forget the situation where I was asked to see someone on an emergency basis. This is someone who worked for an oil company. He came in, he looked quite distressed, and he said, "I'm really angry at my boss." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, my boss makes fun of me, he mocks me in front of other people, he calls me names, etc., and I'm really angry." And I said, "How angry are you?" And he said, "I'm thinking of killing him." And I had been trained to ask, "Do you have a plan?" And he said, "Yes, my gun's out in the truck." And this was really my first acquaintance with my first acquaintance with workplace, what we now call workplace bullying, and I couldn't comprehend it. My two questions were, he had gone to, I guess human resources, and they did nothing.
Right.
And so the two questions were, why would a boss treat an employee this way? First of all, and then why wasn't the company doing anything?
Yeah.
And so over the years, my interest in this grew as I heard about more and more suffering, and I developed a reputation for dealing with difficult bosses. And so I would have people referred to me at the EAP who were, what I now call abrasive leaders, abrasive managers. And so I started exploring the issues with them and made some, pretty interesting discoveries about that. But that was the origin of my interest.
Got it.
Wow.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. You have some great stories in the book, too.
If I can also say, the litany of suffering hasn't ended. I mean, I would interview employees who were contemplating committing suicide because of how they were being treated. So, the suffering continues.
Right.
Well, Laura, let me ask you on the heels of that, the workplace violence where, there are some employees who do take a gun to the office and cause harm. I mean, have you researched that? Is it based on the abrasive manager situation?
Many times people come in and commit violence in the workplace because they feel they've been treated badly.
Yep.
And I have not really, devoted any time to research on to what degree is that true, that they were in fact treated badly, or to what degree was it not? Let's say there was an underperforming employee who was terminated for lack of performance, who then says, I'm going to, get vengeance on my employer. So I don't know, to what degree those terrible instances can be related to, abrasive conduct on the part of superiors. I don't know.
Well, what I have heard and seen around the world are assistants speaking to me about respect and disrespect. That when an assistant feels, respect is the thing that assistants want most in this workplace, even more than money. And disrespect is the surest, fastest way to have them want to run for the hills. Mm-hmm. That's what I know for sure. And these women are not necessarily prone to violence, I don't think, as they share. I've now heard hundreds of stories. Mm-hmm. But what they do are passive-aggressive behaviors, and they're not, this is a group of people who are certainly not interested in going above and beyond for their managers or their companies. So for me, it seems like it's a lose-lose situation,
Right, and in the earlier session that I had with both of you, I talked about that when any organism perceives a threat, it feels anxiety, fear, anxiety, and the basic defenses are fight or flight. And you're describing that when the assistant experiences the threat of being treated disrespectfully, it may dissolve into sort of a combination passive-aggressive. I'm not going to deal with the person. I'm not going to be straightforward, and in fact, I may fight back, but in sort of quiet, passive-aggressive ways.
Right.
And it's sad. It's sad.
It is. And so, Vicki and I, our effort is to, do something about it. And mm-hmm. to that end, we'd love to know what you're seeing around the world, in the United States and internationally. What's going on with this subject? Are we, is there hope on the horizon here? What are you seeing?
Well, there's hope on the horizon in the sense that there's increasing evolution of anti-bullying laws in the workplace. But with, as I said, that's occurring in numerous countries, not in the United States yet. It's being debated in legislatures as we speak. But the problem is that many people hold the belief that, gee, once we enact these anti-bullying laws, then bullying will stop. And if I can draw an analogy to sexual harassment, we enacted sexual harassment laws, but the laws didn't stop the behavior. It was the employers who took the law seriously and came in to their to their leaders and said, you can no longer engage in these behaviors. And so what we're seeing is, I'll give Australia as an example. In Australia, they do have anti-bullying laws, and people are bringing lawsuits now. And then what the employer does is they conduct an investigation, and usually it's so late in the process and so much damage has been done. So they'll bring in an external investigator to determine, was this bullying? Does it fit the definition? But the problem is that even if they find it is a case of bullying, then they hold the employer accountable for doing something. And that might be that they send the abrasive leader off to a class, which is notoriously ineffective, or a slap on the hand. Or if there is no formal finding of bullying, it doesn't solve the problem because everybody's still distressed. The employer still has that abrasive leader functioning in their midst. So what do you do? And I think what needs to be understood is that employers have the responsibility to have a respectful workplace, and if they discover certain individuals are not behaving that way, they need to intervene, set limits and consequences for further disrespectful behavior, and in some cases, if they wish to invest in the individual, offer help through specialized coaching. Now, it's really, the employers will drive this, but until employers understand that they can do things, it's not a pretty picture.
Right. So that leads me to asking you about what can assistants do then? We unfortunately hear some jaw-dropping stories of screaming and throwing things and profanity usage, and public humiliation is a big one. What's your advice to assistants about what they can actually do? Because as we said at the top, many abrasive managers are oblivious and clueless to their behaviors. As crazy as that may sound to some, and certainly some assistants look at me and say, "Oh, Bonnie, that's not true. They totally know what they're doing." What can they do? What can they say? What are the words to say?
Great. Before I answer that question, I want to preface it by relating to what you just said about, I think many executive assistants will agree that the abrasive individuals are really clueless, that they lack psychological insight, that they don't read people well. And let me give one or two examples. Many times when I'm coaching an abrasive leader, I always interview the coworkers, including the executive assistant, who, in my view, has really seen it all, has heard it all. Many times people will confide in the assistant, or, as we said before, the assistant will experience the abrasive behavior. And let's take two of these behaviors. One is I'll discover a whole theme about how they publicly humiliate people. They conduct meetings and they'll single out an individual in front of everybody else and say, "Oh, well, you can't do this, this is wrong," and everybody's cringing in the meeting. Now, you can look at that two ways. One is that the person is evil and they're inflicting torment on that individual intentionally. What I discovered over and over and over again was when I would bring the feedback to the abrasive individual, and there was a whole theme that said publicly humiliates, the leader says, "I don't intend to humiliate people. That's not my intent." And I'd say, "Well, help me understand. Why do you do that? Why do you single somebody out in a meeting?" And they say, "Well, it's my way of teaching everybody. I use it as an educational tool, that if I chastise one person, then everybody will learn." And I always feel like saying, "Yeah, and how's that working for you?"
Yeah.
So they don't get it. They lack psychological insight. I just dealt with another individual who interrogates people. They'll say, "Well, why do you think that? Why do you think we should do that? And what do you think is the justification for that?" And so the experience is I'm being interrogated. I'm being treated disrespectfully. And when I ask the client, "Look at all this feedback about how you drill people and you interrogate them," and they say, "Well, I'm just trying to find out if they know what they need to know. It's my way of helping the people, explore whether they know everything they should know." And again, I want to say to them, "Well, how's that working for you?" Because you come off looking like the Grand Inquisitor. So not everybody is clueless. There are a few psychopaths, sociopaths out there, but the majority of these leaders lack psychological insight. They need help. They need help to see. Now, back to your question of what can an assistant do. I think the assistant can bring it to the attention of higher leadership. How do they do that? What do they say? And let's say the assistant is not being treated abrasively, but they're seeing it. And hopefully with other people, that they wouldn't necessarily have to go alone, they can go to higher leadership and say, "Look, I need to talk to you about, John Smith. John has a lot of strengths. People really respect this quality or his ability to make decisions, etc. But I have observed John treating people in ways that are really counterproductive to the organization." And you can even talk about your own experience. "I need to let you know that he yells at me. There are occasions where he has called me stupid in front of other people. He throws papers down on my desk and says this is, crap," or whatever. So if you can share your own observations calmly, also if you share your observations of how John Smith treats other people. "I have seen him hang up on the phone. People come to me saying that they don't want to work with him. They'd rather talk to me and go through me than go through him." And then the next step is for the executive assistant to say, "I value this organization, and this is really costing us. It's costing us because I can tell you 2 other people are thinking of quitting. I can't reveal their names. People avoid him, and they shouldn't. He has a lot to develop, and I think John Smith needs help." And then you can whip out my Winners Who Become Losers article and put it on their desk, and I encourage you to contact me at the Boss Whispering Institute, and I'll send this article for free. because it's written for upper management on how to intervene. So if you present yourself in a calm way, very rational, as someone who cares about the well-being of the organization, who's really helping them see that this person needs help, that he shouldn't be attacked or she shouldn't be attacked, but she's running roughshod over employees. And again, if you can do that with more than you going in, that's the option. If you're talking directly with the abrasive, I think there's, you can, it's risky because they may get very defensive and perceive you as a threat. But if you can go in and say, look, you've done these things and it's just not helpful. I'm here to help you. I'm here to support you. I want to help you in any way I can. And when you do this with me or say this to me, it's really not helpful. And I've had employees who said, my father used to yell at me. I won't put up with that now. So you can escalate it and say, I'm not going to put up with this, sort of alluding to the fact that you will leave. But again, I encourage you to read the Risky Business chapter about those scaled strategies.
Right. Right. That was really very, very helpful.
Yeah, I like because a lot of times we're emotional when we're in the situation. So having those words that resonate with management, things like counterproductive, costly. There were some other words that you said. What was the other?
This isn't helping us.
Oh, helping us.
This isn't and also not attacking the individual, not saying he's a terrible human being or she's the worst boss I've ever had, but of saying this is really costing the organization.
Yeah.
I can see that she intends to do, she's trying to get things done, but I think she needs help. Because so often, if you go in an angry way, you'll be written off as yet another whining employee, who's just causing problems. And then when they go to the abrasive leader, or and say, well, we had Paula contact us, or we had somebody contact us, then the abrasive leader can say, oh, it's just somebody who doesn't like the salary I gave them, or they can kind of dispute it or say that didn't happen. And so it's helping educate leadership.
Right. So Laura, are you seeing any difference between the way women react to abrasives versus men?
Yes, I do. I'm going to make some grand generalizations here, but
Please
what
do.
I've learned that men tend to go to work and really measure themselves according to achievement. And so they're focused on objectives and achievement. We women who, were designed to really care about relationships all the way back to the days in the Neanderthal cave where the husband goes out and kills the mastodon, he's achieving food, and we're supposed to be nurturing, the young ones and relating to them and developing them. I think that women tend to take abrasive behavior more personally. And they tend to think, is it something I've done or something that's wrong with me, as opposed to seeing it as the activity of an insecure leader. Mm-hmm. And so I think they may, in fact, be more wounded by it, sadly enough.
Right. Well, that's what certainly we're seeing. I shared that 95 to 98% of assistants in the world are female.
Yes.
So
yes.
This is a phenomenon that we're seeing repeated again and again and again. Mm-hmm. So can a leopard change its spots? Do you have a story about, leaders who actually do transform?
Mm-hmm. I'd be glad to share sort of a brief case study of someone that I worked with. He was referred for coaching because he would explode in temper outbursts maybe 2 or 3 times a week. He'd been talked about it earlier on, about 6 months prior, where he would explode 2 or 3 times a day. And he was viewed as being very aggressive with employees, kind of writing them off, blaming them always for being lazy or incompetent, lazy or stupid, never took any responsibility for how he might be contributing to that, and was really to the point now where people just didn't want to deal with him. And so the employer actually, in this case, the human resources person heard a group of employees walking down the hallway saying, well, joking about it, it's time to put out a contract on him. And the human resources person called me, and I said, well, gee, if employees are threatening to put out a, death contract on their boss, maybe we have a problem. So what I did, and the way the coaching method works, is the employer intervened and said, look, this can't go on. We can't have people quitting because of you, and we have a steady stream of complaints, a steady stream of negative perceptions of people feeling they're not treated respectfully. And the client, as I'll call him, he was in a lot of denial. He said it's just basically because they're lazy or stupid or incompetent or whatever. So he sounds like a pretty terrible person. At first blush here. He was referred for coaching, and in the coaching, what we say is, look, there are a lot of negative perceptions about your management style. Let's find out what they are. So I interviewed his coworkers and heard all of this distress, all of the suffering, brought it back to him, purged of identifying information, and he got to see that he was viewed as controlling, losing emotional control, publicly humiliating. Those are at least 3 of the themes that came forward. So as I started talking with him, I helped him see this basic process that I've talked about, that any organism that perceives a threat feels fear, anxiety, and engages in fight or flight. And he got to see that people were fleeing from him or fighting him. And he was able to develop insight. For instance, he said, I'm so frustrated with these lazy people who won't go with innovative change, right? And so he would bark and bite when they wouldn't, do the changes he wanted. And so I started working with him to help develop a little more insight, and I said, why do you think they don't want to make the change? And the thing was, he was a really bright guy, and he said, oh, because they're afraid. They're afraid they'll be blamed. And so I said, oh, so they're afraid they'll be blamed for making the changes, so that's why they fight you. That's why they defend against your request for innovation. And then I said to him, how could you have them think about it without barking or biting? How can you have them not be afraid and not be afraid of being blamed? And right away he came up with a great strategy. He went back to the work group and he said, I think you're all resisting me because you're afraid I'm going to blame you and upper management is going to blame you. I'm not. I'll take the blame. You don't have to worry about it. I will back you. And so what was so shocking for me was to see how quickly, if you just show these people a simple construct, they can start analyzing others' behavior and their own behavior in a deeper way. So instead of writing everybody off as lazy or stupid or not as bright as me or not as competent as me, they start thinking about, well, why are they resisting me? Why are they fighting? Or why are they fleeing? And so it's a very enjoyable approach. And what happened was he stopped the emotional tantrums right away because he was embarrassed that he was seen as a tantrum-throwing infant. He thought that was a sign of power, and he saw that it wasn't perceived that way. He stopped that right away, but he started dealing with people in a calmer, more rational way, and he quit with the barking, he quit with the biting, and was able to talk with people in a calm way to work through difficult issues. So
Terrific.
these people can change. Not every single one, but so many of the people that we work with, those people, coaches I've trained, the leader comes back and says, I always felt I had to be perfect. I felt I had to, I was so hard on myself and I was so hard on everybody else, and now I realize I can't be perfect. I don't need to be perfect, and I don't need to ride everybody. I'm so glad I have this awareness. So it can be very enlightening and enjoyable for them to gain this insight.
So great. What I hope is not only our assistants listening, but I hope a lot of leaders are listening as well, because that's great insight to what's going on.
So, Laura, you've got a huge mission. I don't envy you at all. I'm excited about your book, and I'd love to know. We'd love to know where you're headed now. Like, what's next for you? What's happening in the next year or two? And then for folks that want to pick up your book, well, of course, we'll include the link to it. But what can they expect? A few things from your book.
Well, let me answer the question first of where am I going now. So I've been coaching abrasive leaders for over 30 years now. I've coached over more than 400. And back then I really solidified the method the concept of the boss whispering method back in my doctoral studies in around 2005. Then I wrote the book, and then, I think everybody's going to read the book and the whole world's going to change, and it doesn't. So that's when I started the Boss Whispering Institute, which is dedicated to research and training in the field of coaching abrasive leaders. So now I train coaches, executive coaches all over the world, UK, Canada, Australia, just different parts of the world, Iceland, I'm going to be doing a seminar. And so I train coaches so that they can offer their help to employers worldwide. And the more that I would talk with people that I've trained, what we found over and over again was how frightened employers were about not dealing with the situation, how they would engage in this flight behavior. Well, it's not that bad, or he doesn't do that to me, so I'm not sure I need to deal with it, or he only does it when he's under pressure. All this rationalizing of the abrasive behavior. So my mission now, having got the training of the executive coaches up and running, and having people who are now available to help employers, and they have their own private practices, but we refer employers to them in their private practices, is really, I guess you could call it, employer whispering, which is to get employers all calm down.
We'd love that.
Instead of running away from the problem, they tend to not fight. They tend to run, engage in flight, and get them all calmed down. So we've just developed a one-day managing abrasive behavior seminar for managers, which helps them understand, number one, why do people behave abrasively? Number two, how do they intervene? How do they sit down and talk to them about it and, refer them for help if they choose to do that? And then thirdly, how do they deal with all the defensiveness that they're going to encounter when they have that conversation? So when the abrasive individual says, well, I'm not abrasive, or I didn't say that, or I didn't do that, or, well, you're not a very good manager either, or I'm the only one who gets everything done around this place, or this is bullying of me. Whatever the defensiveness is, it tends to just stymie the employer. It throws them for a big loop. So we help train the employer, the superiors, on how to have that conversation, how to stay calm, how to offer help, and hold the person accountable for acceptable performance and conduct, and how in their own organizations to define acceptable conduct. Because, employers kind of keep saying, well, there's no law and we don't know how to define, what is bullying anyway. But I'll tell you, you don't need to define bullying. You need to define acceptable conduct, and every employer has the right to do that. As an example, what's the first organization we all worked in? Our family, right? That's the first organization. We did chores, we had to walk the dog, or clean our rooms. And who are the executives of that organization? Our parents. And what our parents set expectations for performance. You will get the orange peels out of your bedroom. And conduct. You will not punch your brother, or in my case, you will not punch your sister. And so, and then if we did punch our brother or sister, there were consequences, hopefully. We got sent to our room. We didn't get to go to the movies that weekend. And it's the same principles hold, that employers have the right to define acceptable performance and acceptable conduct, and to hold us accountable for that, and to do it in a very calm way, but they need to be prepared to enact consequences. And so right now I find so many employers kind of feel hopeless and helpless, and I want to open their eyes, calm them down, and help them make the workplace a psychologically safe place to work.
Well, Laura, we thank you so much for your work and what you're doing, because it's certainly having very positive ramifications in the global workplace, and we'll do everything we can to help spread the word as well. And to that end, Be the Ultimate Assistant is initiating in April the Speak Up Pledge, and our listeners can go to speakuppledge.com, because clearly we have a lack of communication in our workplace where whether there's an abrasive situation or not, there's a real need for assistants to be speaking with managers and vice versa, that there's a fear factor both ways, which you have very clearly laid out for us in these 2 episodes. So I am sure that I am one of your very biggest fans around the world, and we are so grateful that you have spent this time with us, and I hope that perhaps you'll come back again. Will you do that?
I would love to, and I so support the speak up because, as you say, everybody's afraid, and it's not until some people speak up, and sometimes that can be very frightening, that people can become educated and change.
Right. And clearly I've read your book from cover to cover, and what I love about it is that it actually shares the things to do. What do you offer the roadmap? Do you want to just share briefly, what can our listeners expect from your book if they pick it up?
Well, what they can expect is they can expect to hear about my experiences with grizzly bears, which really taught me a lot about working with abrasive leaders, because I actually intimidated a grizzly bear. But I wrote it for people so that they could understand what's going on with abrasive leaders. Why do they behave the way they do? And then what is going on with employers who don't do anything? Why aren't they doing anything? And then I wanted to write the chapter for people who are being directly subjected to abrasive behavior. So those are all the things, and it's written, I hope, in very enjoyable and practical way. But I also think if you want to read the book and then pass it on to upper management, it's very helpful to them because they struggle, they're suffering, believe it or not.
I've had
as well.
Laura, I've had assistants send the book anonymously.
Yes.
To both other assistants and managers.
Yes.
And hopefully that's working too. So
Yes.
Vic, do you want to wrap us up?
Yes. Oh, Dr. Crawshaw, I'm so excited. I'm a new fan now. This is so awesome for you to join us for these 2 episodes. I know that this is going to resonate with so many people around the world. And I'm sure people are going to have questions. So we'll be sure to include resources in this episode, in the last episode, as far as how to connect with you, how to access the resources that you so generously offered, and to obviously pick up your book and just reach out to you. Because we also want to include your schedule if there's a way for people to connect with you while you're in all of those cities that you stated earlier. If you're doing a seminar or coaching session, there might be people listening that they're interested in being a boss whisperer or they know someone who should go through the training. So we certainly want to connect people to you in that respect.
Great.
And so again, I just want to reiterate the name of the book is called Taming, as in lion taming, Taming the Abrasive Manager by Dr. Laura Crawshaw.
So that concludes today's episode. We'd love your feedback, topic ideas, and questions. Visit the podcast page at betheultimateassistant.com. Thank you once again to our guest, Dr. Laura Crawshaw, and to you for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye, Bonnie.
Bye, Vicki.
Bye, Laura.
Bye.